Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Galen Moore. I'm on the core team at Axelar, which is a cross-chain communication project. Web3 is supposed to be a permissionless place. But can we really create a permissionless, decentralized future with siloed ecosystems? That's what we'll be talking about today. And the first panel that I have to introduce covers this very issue. L1's trying to maximize the value capture, and how do we get around that and create a Web3 that looks different from Web2, where platforms control our data. Harry Evans is CTO at Unfinished Labs and co-creator of DSNP, an open source protocol that seeks to address this issue. He joins CoinDesk's Ben Schiller in a conversation. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another session at CoinDesk Consensus Festival. Thanks all for coming. Welcome, Harry.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about a very important topic today, something that we all use, which is social media. And we're going to talk about what is wrong with social media today and how we can potentially fix it with Web3 ideas, Web3 technology. So Harry here is CTO, as Galen was saying, of Unfinished, which is building some open source protocols that do exactly that. So let's talk first of all about what's wrong with social media today and how we can potentially fix that with Web3. So we're all aware that Facebook has sort of proliferated all this different disinformation. It's abused its customers. It's sort of undermined democracy, particularly during elections time. And its algorithms are sort of prioritizing conflict and sensationalism because that's what sort of makes money and drives traffic. And particularly with the Facebook files, which were published by the Wall Street Journal last year, you could really see the kind of pernicious impacts of this company. And not to single out Facebook only, but that's definitely one of the biggest players, obviously. So talk about your approach at Unfinished. What exactly are you doing? You're building these open protocols and you're developing a new form of social graph. So just sort of unpack that for us.
Absolutely. So we've been working for a while on something called the Decentralized Social Networking Protocol, DSNP. And the idea there is that a portable social graph can fundamentally change how the sort of power imbalance between users and the large social networking sites. It's sometimes hard for folks to connect like the simple things that they do on social media every day with like threats to democracy or sort of like some of the issues we saw around the election, et cetera. But the one of the two key aspects there are, one, this idea that you don't know who has access to your data. Everything from Cambridge Analytica to the Facebook files, et cetera. You've seen folks having no idea that the data that's sort of putting into the system, how it's being used sort of behind the scenes. There's no one asking if you can sort of interact with my particular data set just because I've posted this way or I've expressed these interests or that sort of thing. You also have at the core this idea that given that I'm not really the controller of my data on those sites, that the way that they're monetized drives all of these sort of like negative interactions, all of these sort of non-aligned business models, if you will, where the site's interests and the user's interests are sort of directly in conflict.
Right.
So the idea that users actually can take control of their own data and decide how it's used and where it's used gets rid of this kind of lock-in aspect, because there's this giant sunk cost when you're dealing with existing social networks, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or wherever. Any data that I put in there, I can't easily take it. I can download a file, but I can't do anything useful with that, right? The idea around DSNP is a portable social graph. The idea that instead of the site having your graph and you having to go there to interact with it, that you can sort of take it with you wherever you go.
Right.
It starts to look something more like a sign-on with DSNP, or delegate these rights to a particular site to be able to see some of your graph or construct your feeds, et cetera.
Right. So just to kind of dial back, and you were saying that sometimes it's hard to kind of connect up the kind of the cat video that you might post on Facebook or whatever, and the kind of the threat to democracy. So how does that kind of link up in your mind?
Social networking as it stands today is so much more than just the interaction with your friends on the site that you're using. It is also the feeds that you're given, the recommendations that you're given, and the sort of the sort of outrage-driven engagement models that are aligned with the existing social network. So it isn't that communicating a cat meme to your friends is a threat on its own to democracy. It's the fact that while you're there, they engage you in a lot of other ways that drive towards conflict in ways that are, sort of damaging at all levels. They're damaging to the sort of conversation and interaction we have as human beings. And they're polarizing because that, in many ways, whether humans intended it or not, the algorithms that they've optimized for are primed for delegation, right? Engagement. Sorry, right. Wrong word. Are primed to keep you on the site longer and longer, and the easiest way to do that is via conflict. Their business model is not aligned with their sort of users' mental or societal health.
Right. Interesting. So talk about the social graph then. I mean, how does the experience of going on, say, Facebook today compare with what you're building?
So,
point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things from what we're building point of view, the DSMP is meant to be a protocol similar to what you see on the web with HTTP or with email with SMTP that adds this social layer to the internet itself. So any particular site that wants to engage in a social way with you can make that available as you arrive at the site. In some ways, it would manifest somewhat similar to kind of a sign-in with, like Facebook or Google. We're used to those sorts of things. Right. Only in this particular case, when you're authenticating, you're doing so with a system that's designed on top of blockchain and has a key that you're using to sign. In many ways, it looks similar to some of the passwordless initiatives that Apple recently announced, or that you're seeing Google and others kind of pushing at this point for a passwordless experience. But the idea here is that as a user, when I end up on a particular site that has this sort of capability, I can simply say, yes, I want you to have access to some or all of this data set. Yes, I want you to be able to see my social graph or only my public followers or some set of content that I posted, or I want you to be able to construct feeds for me, but not necessarily to sort of like send messages to my friends, et cetera.
Right. So just to be clear, you're not actually trying to compete directly with Facebook. You're not trying to create the next Facebook. I mean,
no, not at all. We're actually the protocol itself is specifically designed not to be monetized, to make it this kind of like layer that can, just like HTTP is not monetized, the core web protocols are not monetized in the same sort of fashion. And we are not trying to create a specific site to compete Facebook. We're actually engaging with a number of partners to use DSMP and to build all sorts of different sites. A big aspect here is that there's this hunger on the internet for social engagement, but the actual social data is locked up in these little islands of connectivity.
Right.
And with DSMP, you can actually unlock that in a way that allows you to bring your social context with you, whether you're gaming, shopping, interacting with your friends in other ways, but it doesn't have to be a destination point that you go to. It can be a context that you bring with you anywhere.
Right. So rather than depending on the platform to keep your data and to do what they want with it, you keep your data yourself. You're self-sovereign.
Yes, absolutely. You're self-sovereign. And we've actually looked at different ways to accomplish that. And there's a lot of different sort of proposals out there around where that data can live and how it can be managed. And what we've settled on is, at least from a social graph perspective, it's so important that there's very few places you could actually store that without a major conflict of interest coming up, right? Any place that large concentrations of that data is put becomes very susceptible to monetization in the same sort of ways that we've seen today. And one of the only places that we've seen that the rules can be set up in a way where users can trust that it won't be changed on them is a blockchain.
Right.
You can set the rules up in a particular fashion, and users can trust in this sort of trustless environment that their data won't be used in ways they don't agree to.
Right. Is it also more secure if you're not creating this kind of honeypot of data that someone can hack into?
I think it actually brings a greater level of security because you actually can directly examine how it's being encrypted, how it's being stored. For the folks that of a more technical bent that want to dig into the details of it, if you will, the privacy concerns can be directly inspected. It's awful hard to do like a security audit on how Snap stores user data, right? And we hear about data breaches all the time with different companies that have stored data in, let's say, less than best practices sort of ways, like not encrypted at rest or shared with partners in ways that allowed them to leak. Right. With a system like this, even if there are problems, they can improve quickly. They're not hidden and swept into the corners waiting to be exploited.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about Unfinished itself, because it's a sort of hybrid organization. You have the non-profit arm, you have the for-profit arm, and then there's also a foundation. Just talk about those kind of pieces and how they fit together.
Absolutely. So I'm a part of Unfinished Labs, which is specifically the group that's been focused on the technology around DSMP. We also have Unfinished, which is constructing a network of impact organizations to actually bring many more people into the conversation around social networking, the digital economy, and sort of equity in this space. Right. And along with the McCord Institute, which is a institute that's been created with Georgetown and Sciences Po around sociologists and ethicists, et cetera, there's this initiative that we all sort of fit into called Project Liberty, which is looking to to sort of transform the web and create this more equitable digital environment where users control their data directly, and many of these sort of societal problems we've seen that I think in some ways social networking have brought to light but are not the sole cause of can really be addressed. And the combination of looking at how it's governed, and not just like token governance, like actual like digital democracy, if you will. Right. Looking how it's governed in that larger context, technology that can aid it, and bringing together like folks other than technologists to help define how the future looks, right? Because I feel like one of the issues and how we got into the position we are in the social networking space is this idea that a set of technologists can just sort of build a set of code and that defines a set of interactions, and much like complexity theory, whether it was the intention or not, you end up with these bad outcomes from lack of examination or lack of experience in constructing regulation or a general kind of governance or control systems.
Right. So you mentioned the McCourt Institute there. That's yes. Frank McCourt. He's a former owner of the LA Dodgers.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Yes.
So he's become sort of fascinated with this idea of this kind of pernicious Web2 environment, and he really wants to fix the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, like the impetus for what we're doing here came from Frank. It came out of a set of discussions with myself and Braxton Woodham, who's our president of Unfinished Labs, and Frank towards the end of 2019 about these issues with these risks to democracy. The election cycle was going on, all that, and it really brought to light so many of these things that we'd sort of been bothered with for a while. Braxton and I actually were co-founders of a social network back in 2006. So we'd had a little bit of experience with the space.
Really been around that long?
Yeah, and it's been a thing that we've been thinking about for a while. And in those conversations with Frank, we really felt like there was a way that you could sort of attack this problem, but you couldn't do it with just technology. Right. You really needed to bring in some of these other aspects. You needed to bring in thoughtful governance, folks that have like studied the governance systems of societies, historically, through the ages, and are engaged with regulators today right. about other aspects of governance. And you needed the ability to bring folks that haven't been in the conversation so far, that marginalized groups, bringing in like sort of a diverse set of voices to actually talk about these issues and make sure that you're not just ending up where we started.
Right. So some people see a kind of conflict between the kind of technology and the regulations, and will say, well, we can only fix this thing if we get the Silicon Valley on board and the technology on board. And some people say, well, we need the kind of heavy hand of government to fix it. I mean, where do you see that kind of balance in what you're trying to do?
Well, I mean, I think a big aspect of what we're trying to do is be very thoughtful about how those two pieces go together. And I think that there's a lot of actual complementary actions that can be taken. So as an example, not to go too deep into the weeds, but in DSMP, one of the concepts is the ability to delegate rights to some of your data to a particular site. But there's also the ability to revoke those rights. you can only do so much once you've let someone see some portion of your data. When you revoke the rights, obviously they can't do anything with it in the future, but you can't know that they've removed that copy. But laws like CCPA and GDPR and the right to be forgotten in Europe, et cetera, have
privacy laws.
Yeah, these laws that have been sort of evolving. I think that there's real opportunities for, with very basic modifications or enhancements, or in some cases just application of those laws to these problems, where the expression of the user intent, I don't want you to have my data anymore, expressed in sort of this technical way, can also be married with this kind of regulation concept where that me saying that becomes effectively that notification to delete my data. Right. And now you have government acting as an enforcement for user self-sovereignty versus it being something that locks in incumbents.
I mean, do you agree with Elizabeth Warren that we should be sort of breaking up Facebook and sort of?
I mean, I feel like whenever like government gets into the realm of trying to dictate how a specific enterprise can go, I mean, there's really mixed results on this, whether it's, break up Microsoft that, went all through the 90s and early 2000s, or the breakup of AT&T, telecoms in the past. I think when you end up with a monopoly-like solution, that's always an option that's, sort of on the table. But I think the bigger thing is unlocking the ability to innovate in the space. Things like a portable social graph allows someone that goes to, if a developer builds a new site using something like the SMP, the first person that shows up with their graph can get value. They don't have to wait for 10 million other people. Right. There's been this this dam blocking innovation in the social space. I mean, if you look at the rate of innovation with the existing players, it's not particularly fast. There's so much potential there. I feel like we're in, still the early 90s equivalent, if you will, from a social networking standpoint and how these things can be done. But the network effect is such a powerful thing. Without the ability to get value by going to a new site almost immediately, it drastically favors the large existing players and incumbents. Right. So the ability to take a portable graph, show up, and that first person that shows up can get value from some new experience the developers created, or a new type of site, or a new community that's been formed. That should cause an explosion of innovation in the space and really make a Facebook or a Twitter have to compete on their merits again at that point. They can't depend on that network lock-in anymore.
I mean, a lot of people would be surprised that Silicon Valley is not as sort of innovative as it sort of makes out. There's some sort of mythology around this kind of innovation engine in Menlo Park there. I mean, it's sort of...
Well, I mean, it's interesting when you look at it. Last summer was Clubhouse came out big, and all of a sudden Facebook, Twitter, everyone else were offering audio chat rooms as well, right? The innovation is driven in many cases by the competition, and when the players get too comfortable in their market segments, they sort of, create these different swim lanes for themselves, and as long as they're comfortable in that swim lane and no one's challenging them there, the rate of innovation goes down. It's a kind of a natural market dynamic, and I think that creating systems that allow for competitors to enter and actually have a real shot at things, not just to make some noise, but actually be able to overcome sort of the network effect lock-ins that the existing companies have. It really actually drives real competition. You see these spurts of innovation when they feel threatened, and then it sort of settles down again, whether it's stories or voice or whatever the sort of feature of the quarter is. It seems like, but I think that there's really this possibility for innovation to parallelize a lot more. If you've got this ability for developers to tap into the data sets of users based on the user's control and consent, I think that you gain the difference between incremental or iterative innovation in a particular company and the equivalent of evolution, where you have thousands of parallel experiments happening at the same time.
Right. Okay, so more technical sort of question. I mean, blockchains were not really designed for social messaging or social media, right? I mean, the Bitcoin is a very slow throughput system for, not very many transactions, and that's why we haven't really seen payments up to now. And now we're seeing the Lightning Network, I know, but it's kind of a relatively new thing. And we've seen a lot of other blockchains that you kind of, they're victims of their own success, like whether it's CryptoKitties or Ethereum or even Solana recently. Once they have a lot of transactions going through them, they get kind of clogged up and the fees go up, etc. So how do you kind of cope with that problem in your model? I mean, once people start using the system, it's going to get clogged up again, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the key technical challenges that we realized we needed to address when we started contemplating using blockchain for the sort of security aspects of this project. But one of the major realizations we had around, for example, the kind of CryptoKitty sort of things or the virtual land sales that have happened more recently,
right.
et cetera, is that without careful consideration around the scale, putting social on blockchain would fail. It just runs into a wall. Its very success leads to its failure. So we've taken a very conscious view of how to scale this. And what we realized is that the ability to secure social media, the messaging related to it, the graph, et cetera, to a blockchain is the essential aspect, but not necessarily all of that data has to live on the chain itself. We can anchor it to the chain like you see from certain other L2 sort of solutions out there, layer 2 solutions sitting above a primary blockchain, while still guaranteeing the sort of validity and authenticity of that data set. So for some data types, we've said, no, this is so important and there's so many valuable use cases around, for example, composability, it has to live on-chain. So for example, from a graph perspective,
right.
Our current design says that is on-chain. But from a messaging perspective, like a post of my breakfast or a like of someone else's post or a comment or something like that, those actually live off-chain in batches that have cryptographic signatures that secure them back to the chain itself. And what we're doing there is making a conscious trade-off between availability and scalability. It doesn't mean that you can't reach these things when we talk about that. It just means that there is an alternate mechanism you have to use to retrieve that data set. However, if you do, you can always verify it. You can always know that it hasn't been substituted or tampered with, and you can know who actually was the author of that data, who had authorizations to it, et cetera.
Right. I'm just wondering about sort of business models. I mean, a lot of people don't like Facebook, but it is a sort of financial juggernaut, and Wall Street loves it. I mean, how do you compete with something like that, with something that's designed not to make money in the same way?
So, I mean, I think there's two aspects to that. At a protocol level, I mentioned that we specifically designed DSMP not to be tokenized. So we want it to be this sort of like basic layer throughout the internet, like this social layer to the internet itself. But the idea here from a business model standpoint is that any number of companies, it's an open access protocol. Any number of companies can come and build on top of it and compete with each other and with the established businesses. And the idea that it can have such widespread usage, the data is sort of the portability of the data itself becomes the competitive advantage from a business model standpoint.
Right. I mean, sort of relatedly, I mean, privacy and issues like that, I mean, seem to be something that technologists and journalists sort of care about, but a lot of people out there maybe don't. They just want something to work. I mean, how do you create the consumer demand for something that's new when people are sort of basically happy just sharing stuff on Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of angles to that as well. And the first is, I think there are a certain number of users that are actually concerned with how their data is used. If you look at some of the smaller social networks, most of their big surges are in the same time frames, if you will, as the latest Facebook scandal or the latest data breach with another company. So you have these waves of concern that people have, but like any sort of news cycle related thing, they sort of fade with time. Some people take action, but I think having a real viable alternative for folks that have that motivation explicitly is one aspect. Another one is this portability aspect. The idea that I have these islands of social that I deal with, whether it's in gaming like a PlayStation Network or an Xbox Live, or I go to Facebook to interact with my family, or I go to even a news site when I'm leaving comments, that's sort of a recreating an account and re-interacting in a social context again. The idea that from both a developer perspective that I can tap into social connections that users already have and a context around the users, whether it's for commenting or sharing, et cetera, from a business model standpoint, as well as from a user standpoint, where I just show up and I can use this thing that I have versus having to establish a new account and recreate a social graph and reconnect with some portion of the folks that I know again.
Right.
So we feel like that utility side from a user perspective, as well as this sort of overlay of actual data privacy and concern, are both aspects that really will drive adoption.
Right, great. So we have about 5 minutes left. Maybe we can just take a couple of questions from the floor if anyone wants to ask one of those. Anyone? Please. Just yell out. It's we can hear you.
There seem to be a ton of efforts similar to yours in this space. How do you compare and contrast, and why not team up as opposed to building another thing?
So yeah, that's a great question. I'll just restate it, which was there's a lot of other efforts in the space that seem to be doing similar things to us. Why don't we team up versus just building our own thing? So I would say two things on this. We've been working on this for quite a while, and we've actually had a number of discussions with the folks in this space, and we're actually actively engaged in conversations with some of them now. I think that from our perspective, we're very happy to cooperate with folks. We've actually been actively reaching out as we've been able to sort of make those connections. We are also very excited about the fact that there are different sorts of initiatives in the space. They're all sort of social related, but everybody has their own sort of spin to this. And I feel like to really achieve what I think both us and these other initiatives want to achieve, none of us have the final answer here yet. This is an iterative process, and I think actually having more participants in the space trying to solve the problem in different ways is actually good, both for the participants themselves, back to the competition that we were talking about with the incumbents in the same sort of way, but also for society in general, like trying to get to that right answer versus just the answer that worked well enough that one organization came up with. So I think in some ways, us challenging each other with our different takes on social and which aspects are most important from a user standpoint, or what drives adoption and awareness of this sort of security from a user standpoint, I think that's healthy, and it's actually good that there's many participants.
Please, yeah.
I'm just curious, if there is no right answer, I don't know if there is any way in which everyone will agree to what a right answer is. And given that most of it looks like sci-fi when we think about how this thing will evolve into very, very small communities, or what would really happen as this technology evolves, and how the social networks change over time. Is it going to be more tribalistic? Is it going to be some big companies becoming even bigger? Since we don't really know how it's going to shape up or what's really kind of going to happen, how do you think about or form some kind of consensus around this?
I'm gonna attempt to summarize that real quick before I answer it, just to make sure that everyone else could hear it as well. But the question was around if we don't know what the one right answer is, and we see folks moving in many directions here, how can we find consensus around protocols or other technology to actually make them sort of work together over the longer term? How does that process work?
Is that a fair summation?
Does that?
I think it's also about the dangers of it as well, because I feel like there is a scope of small communities happening where they don't really know how to connect or get the benefits of the larger networks, especially online.
Gotcha. So to the extent that there's many protocols and it causes a level of fragmentation, how do you actually get that larger social context as well?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think from a standpoint of not knowing the right answer, I think that there isn't one right answer to this. I think that these are the types of things that if you build robust solutions, they have to evolve over time, because we as a society aren't sure what we need over the long term. Like the web, what it looked like in 98 is very, very different than what it looked at in 2008. It's very different than what it looked at 2018.
Yeah.
So I think that the most important thing is twofold. One, that we're actually trying to address the problems as we see them today. And second, iterating our way towards the sort of ever-moving goalposts of what we need as a society. I don't think that this is not to reflect on our name, but I don't think this is a job that's ever done. I mean, part of the reason that I like Unfinished as our name, for example, is because there's no end state here where we have the one right perfect way of doing this. The answer is always evolving, both at a technology level as well as a society. But I think that the flip is we have to try. We agree that what we have right now, I think, doesn't work and has all of these major dangers. And the only way to make them better is to, try to make them better and actually push the state of the art forward and push the sort of discussion forward around this as well.
Well, I think we're out of time, and Harry, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here, and we look forward to seeing your work come to fruition.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in more of what I've been speaking about, you can go to dsmp.org. That's where all the information, our GitHubs, our specs, links to Project Liberty, et cetera. And if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at Harry E. Harry Evans, Harry E.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.